Well, good afternoon again. Welcome to Cancer Support Community Central Ohio's Lunchtime Learning. Today we have Julie Oates from Schettinger Funeral and Cremation Services giving our presentation, and we're very thankful, Julie, for you joining us, and we will turn it over to you.
All right. Well, this is a small group, so we'll keep it casual. If you have questions, if you have comments, I think conversation makes the learning a lot more enjoyable. So we'll go ahead and get started. We do this class for social workers out in the healthcare community, especially the senior housing and end-of-life healthcare community. And so that being said, we have to have objectives. We have to have goals, the things that we want to accomplish. So we want to identify the criteria the families need to meet to qualify for funeral cost assistance. We want to identify resources available to families for assisting with funeral costs. And we want to be able to identify methods for having conversations with cost-sensitive families. So basically, when our funeral directors are sitting down with a family and they're trying to figure out how to best help them, it's kind of a discovery process, like putting pieces of a puzzle together. They want to be able to gather as much information to help that family make good choices for funeral decisions that fit their budget, fit their needs. I think sometimes our funeral directors are sitting across from families, especially if the loss was either traumatic or unexpected, that families just don't know what to think. And so by being able to help them and discover things, then we're going to put together a funeral service that works well for them. Okay, both emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and financially. So we did a survey a while back of folks that work in hospice to kind of get an idea of the number of families that they serve, how many truly need cost assistance, how many are truly looking for financial assistance. So 47% of the people that we surveyed said 0 to 25% of the families they care for actually need financial help. 37% said that 26 to 50% need financial help, and 12% of our responders said that 51 to 75%, and then only 3 said that, they need 100% of help with financial costs for funerals. We also asked them, what are the most important factors that families consider when they're choosing a funeral home or choosing funeral services? Again, comes back to cost. The number one thing, especially when we get calls from social workers in hospice and they're there with the family at the time and they're trying to mediate between the family and the funeral home, they're basically saying, well, cost is the most important thing. In that moment, in that emotional time, that's going to be the number one answer, okay? However, previous experience is another really high factor that goes into how people choose funeral homes or funeral services. If you had a funeral service at XYZ funeral home, you're more than likely going to have your next funeral service at XYZ funeral home. It's logical. Also, reputation. If people have moved to this community and really don't know who's the best or who to call, reputation plays a big factor. Have they talked to friends? Have they talked to neighbors? Who do they recommend? And of course, others, pretty generic, the types of services offered and location. I would have thought location would have been higher, okay? Because like when I sat down with my mom and dad and said, we were pre-planning their funeral, and I said, where do you want to be? They were just like, oh, it doesn't matter. They were very specific. They wanted Gahanna. So location was important to them. But, according to the survey results, location isn't as important as I thought it would be. Okay. Myths and misconceptions, right? So when a person passes away, there is a 255, I think it's still 255 death benefit that's paid out by Social Security. That benefit cannot be used for funeral services. It goes to or surviving spouse or dependent child, and that's it. Any other family members don't get that. That's all it goes to, okay? Regarding other, resources for funeral benefits, for funeral assistance, there is no federal assistance, no state assistance. Medicare and Medicaid don't help at all. So basically, where do families who are financially challenged, where can they turn? Okay, so the number one resource for families. Now, I want to identify what indigent means, okay? Indigent is a term that allows cities to pay for the cost of a cremation. There is no such thing as indigent burial unless the person is a veteran, okay? And basically what that is it's a questionnaire. So either the family or the hospice or the funeral home will ask these questions. And if they check mark all of the boxes, then the city where the person lived would be available to pay for a cremation. Okay, so when we say indigent, we mean no bank accounts, no vehicles, no property, no housing, no resources of any kind whatsoever. Okay, so somebody who is living in a nursing home, excuse me, on Medicaid, that would be somebody that would be considered indigent because of their circumstances, right? So it used to be that it was a state burden, but the states passed it along down to the cities and municipalities. And now each city is responsible to have an account called an indigent fund that will pay for that. But what we have found in our experiences is your larger cities and suburbs have those accounts, but your ones that are kind of like out, much more rural, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't have somebody to manage that kind of account, and it's a little more challenging. But basically, Ohio law, section 9.15A, to be technical about it, says that any dead body is found in a township or municipal corporation. The body is not claimed by anyone or claimed by someone who is also indigent. Then the township or municipality in which the dead person has been a resident at the time of passing shall cause the body to be buried or cremated at its expense. We all know burial is much more expensive than cremation, so these cities have opted for cremation only. Again, the only ones who are eligible for indigent burial are veterans. Okay, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But basically what it says is the right of disposition. So you have situations where, families and, just depending on their circumstances or whatever, don't have resources, don't have money to pay for things. And so when you ask for somebody else to pay for something, then you have to understand that it's their choice. So if you're asking a city to pay for disposition, that city gets to choose how the body is taken care of, and they will always choose cremation. Does that make sense? It's in their cost sensitive parameters. So in the event that an indigent person whose disposition costs are the responsibility of a government body, so say somebody who was living on the street, we'll make it a truly dramatic story, right? Somebody who was living on the street, passes away, has no family, nobody willing to claim responsibility for that body, then that person, that body, if you will, is assigned a public officer, and the public officer will be responsible for disposition. Again, going back to the city where that person was considered to be living, even if the definition of where they were living were the streets of Columbus or the streets of Westerville. Okay, they will be assigned a public officer, and then that person is responsible for managing the disposition. So there is a resource that you can look this all up on. That's the website right there. It's the Ohio Funeral Directors Association has an attorney, and his name is Scott Gilligan, and he makes sure that everything that happens in the state of Ohio falls within legal parameters. And he wrote this big document about indigent and what happens in Ohio, and you can look up the details there. But it basically says what I just told you, okay? Now, I will tell you one thing. When it comes to the different cities and how they define indigent and what they're willing to do, they have the right to set the parameters, okay? So working with the city of Columbus is actually really easy. There's 10 questions, and as long as you check mark the right answers on all 10 questions, the city of Columbus will cremate the body and then give the cremated remains back to the family. Westerville doesn't do that. Westerville will not give the cremated remains back to the family. Why do you think that is?
Because they've already taken responsibility.
If you are asking somebody else to cremate your loved one, and then you're also asking for the cremated remains back, if that entity says no, are you likely to ask that entity for help? Right? Families are very resourceful, and more times than not in Westerville, if there is any other surviving family of an indigent person, they will figure out other ways to pay for services instead of asking the city of Westerville. Make sense? Yeah. So every city defines it a little bit differently. Okay. So veterans, again, veterans get a lot more resources available to them than non-veterans. Now, there again, we got to look at the difference between indigent and non-indigent, okay? Indigent veterans actually have more resources available to them for funeral and burial services than non-indigent veterans. Non-indigent veterans still get money towards their funeral services, but non-indigent veterans are taken care of better. And they are the only population that is allowed to have an indigent burial, okay? But that's because there are designated places in certain cemeteries. Obviously, you've got Arlington Cemetery, which is running out of, excuse me, running out of room. And it's taking a little bit longer to get those bodies buried at Arlington Cemetery, but Arlington Cemetery will bury a veteran, indigent or non-indigent. You also have, I think, another federal military cemetery that I believe there's one in Dayton. And then you have like areas of local cemeteries that have designated veteran spots. I know that Forest Lawn, Sunset, oh gosh, I think a lot of them around town, Green Lawn does, they all have a spot that is specifically for veterans. So, okay. So talking about indigent veterans, the County Veteran Service Commission will contribute $1,000 towards a funeral cost. Other veterans funeral benefits, there's actually, we do a whole veterans presentation on funeral and burial benefits, and we talk about the 10 important facts you should know about your veterans funeral and burial benefits, but they're entitled to more than just financial assistance. They also are entitled to a presentation of a U.S. flag. They have, oh gosh, I forget all of them because that's kind of out of my scope of expertise.
For when my dad was buried, we have the flag. He has a placard on the back of his
Yes.
Of his tombstone to show what his service was. They did the taps, and then it wasn't a 21 gun salute, it was like a 5-gun salute, but he did have the salute, and then they had the veterans present at his funeral service, and then they did the gravesite service with with the rest of the family.
So some of the things that she was talking about actually have to be arranged by the funeral home, okay? Not all of those automatically come with a person being a veteran. Many times it's the funeral home that helps arrange for those things. Like a 5-gun salute is not just automatically done. The bronze plaque is, the flag is, those are some of the things, and then funeral assistance is some of the things. But you don't get a 5-gun salute, you don't get military attendees, you know, those things have to be arranged. And we have really good relationship with some local military groups too, veteran groups that, like they, I forget the name, but they are veteran bikers that will come out before a veteran cemetery. They will line the street with flags, and then they will proceed in the procession to the cemetery in honor of that veteran and that veteran's family. So there's some really wonderful things that can be done for veterans. So just to give you an idea, killed during active duty when a service branch arranges for burial, you can see the numbers there. These are things that are available to families to help with those things. Now, when the service branch arranges for the burial, you can see the difference between that and when a family arranges for a burial. So, but just
Is that the family arranging for a burial for a service member or,
killed during active duty.
okay. So you were making the distinction between the service branch arranging it and the family arranging it.
Correct.
Is that, so if the family members choose to arrange the burial themselves, they would get the
amount there,
they
yes.
would get the amount there, but if the military arranged the funeral, then they would get the amount there
Correct.
for someone who was killed in active duty.
To be used towards funeral,
Okay,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not just willy-nilly given to the family and then, you know, the family does enough. It's actually to be used towards funeral services. Yeah. Yep. All right. There are other resources available. There are actually quite a few foundations for children. We work closely with Nationwide Children's Hospital to help find resources available. So you've got Back in His Arms Again Ministries, which helps with funeral of pre, peri, and postnatal death of children. Nellie's Champions for Kids, Angel Works. These are all foundations that are set up to help with funeral costs for children. Because the one thing that we know is a family with children, even Nationwide Children's Hospital, it doesn't like to admit that children die. And families don't like to admit that children die, but children do die. And so most often they're holding out hope to the very end and not thinking about funeral services. So these foundations are set up to help families with funeral costs. As a matter of fact, Schettinger has a Julie Schettinger fund. There was a sibling to Michael and Kevin Schettinger, who are brothers. And she was actually in between them age-wise, birth-wise, and she died at Nationwide Children's Hospital of a very rare liver disease. And so they set up this foundation, this fund, to be able to help with the costs of products, or not products, but the services part of funerals for children under the age of like 11 years old. So, yeah, so that means anything that would involve our building, our staff, or our vehicles would be covered. What it doesn't cover is all of the other expenses, such as the caskets, the obituary flowers, you know, those things which are kind of out of our control when it comes to costs anyway. So, but yeah, the Julie Schettinger Fund can help with that. There's also such a thing as for-profit donation. So Lifeline of Ohio actually manages organ procurement. Organ procurement is a very highly regulated system of being able to help with organ transplant. But they also do what's called tissue harvesting, okay? And tissue harvesting are for things like skin for burn victims, ligaments and tendons to help, eyeballs. I mean, all kinds of different things that can be harvested to help those who are living with issues where they might need some tissue harvesting. But a for-profit body donation is literally the family saying, I want to donate my loved one's body to science, okay? And that being said, then these companies, we prefer to work with a company called Science Care. They're the most reputable. There are a lot of other companies out there that are not as reputable. And the business of body donation and tissue harvesting is not as highly regulated as organ procurement. Okay, so when a family decides to donate their body to science, such as Science Care, that company will actually pay to have the body prepared, transported out to their location. I think most of them are like in Oregon, Colorado, some of them out there, but that they fly it out there, they do what they're going to do, cremate the rest, and send the cremated remains back to family. It literally is a no-cost option for families. But you got to understand, whatever they do, you got to be good with whatever they do. Okay, so there's that. And sometimes families struggle with the emotional part of that, thinking that, you know, parts of their loved one are living on in other humans that they have no idea. So, you know, you just be prepared for that part of it. But it is a no-cost option for families. I mean, undeniable, okay? The for-profit body donation, they pay for transporting the body, preparing it for flying. They pay the airfare. They pay for the cremation of whatever's left and shipping it back to the family. It is a wonderful option for families that are struggling with financial resources for what to do with the loved one.
For families, how long does that process take?
It just depends on what they're doing. Okay, so if you have, like, say, a medical equipment company that puts a request into one of these for-profit body donation places and says, I need 12 patellas, I'm trying to create this, you know, artificial kneecap for, you know, families or whatever the case is, then, you know, it may be a short period of time. But if there's a lot of things that need to be harvested, it may be a little bit longer. Typically, no more than a month. Okay, for tissue harvesting. Now, you also have those body farms, which that's something completely different. And that's where they literally take a body and they put it somewhere and time lapse video to watch and see the decomposition to learn from. How long, you know, especially for forensic purposes, you know, they know exactly how long a body has been deceased based on the number of maggots. Okay. Or the condition of the maggots. I know that's gross. I'm sorry. But that's kind of, you know, but this is specifically for-profit body donation. Now, if somebody is interested in donating their tissues, if you're already an organ donor with Lifeline of Ohio, they also do tissue harvesting. And it's not a matter of, you know, shipping the body off or whatever the case is. It's all local. It takes place locally. They come and they do what they need to do for harvesting. Like if the person passes away at the hospital, then they will go to the hospital morgue, do what they need to do, and then, you know, the family can have whatever's left to bury or cremate or whatever the case is. So there's that. But with Lifeline of Ohio, it's not a no-cost option. The other thing you have to keep in mind too is if, you know, we have a lot of really great universities in Ohio, and you'll have retired professors say, well, I just want to donate my body back to the university. That's fine. Let me make sure that's not one of the things on here. Well, we'll talk about it, and if it shows up later, we'll have covered it. But when it comes to donating to a university, okay, you need to contact that university and make arrangements in advance. Okay, so that they know that when the time comes and there's contact with the university and they review the contract and stuff like that, the university has the option to refuse. Okay, if they already have enough donated bodies and don't need any more, they can refuse. If the condition of the body is not something they're willing to consider, they can refuse. If the person who passed away has a disease that would not, be good, okay, they can be denied, and then it's still the family's responsibility. But either way, transportation and arrangement needs to be made to be able to transport that loved one from their place of passing to the university. So you have to involve a funeral home anyway. Make sense? Okay. So for-profit body donation, what is tissue? Tissues are bones, they're connective tissue like muscles, they're lining, things like that, where organs are your heart, your lungs, your kidney, things like that. Now, if you kind of take a look at the difference between tissue harvesting and organ donation, right? You have 1.5 million people that have benefited from the tissue harvesting and the transplants and things like that in 2011 versus 22,518 that benefited from organ procurement of the same year, right? Donors. I mean, if you just look at those numbers, when it comes to how many people can be helped by donating your tissues versus donating your organs, the numbers are staggering, okay? One body can help approximately 50 people with tissue donation, but only up to 8 people with organ donation, okay? Just something to consider. Now, with organ procurement, you have a lot of people on a wait list because obviously you have to have exactly the right conditions to be met before that person who's waiting can receive an organ, okay? Where when you have tissue is harvested, it's frozen, it can be kept, okay? Because it's not, you don't have to have a living body for it to still work, if that makes sense, okay? So just, it still needs to be taken care of in a very short period of time after the person passes away, regardless of whether it's tissue harvesting or whether it's organ procurement. You don't have a lot of time to make that kind of decision, and hopefully it's a conversation you've had with your family in advance. So you do have a very short period of time, but yeah.
Julie, I know that when you get your license renewed, they ask you if you're an organ donor, and I think they put it on there. Is tissue automatically part of that? I've always just heard the word organ.
It is
So
not.
that's, so
So if you decide to be an organ donor, if you go and get your driver's license renewed and you say, yep, I want to be an organ donor, your name and the information from your driver's license automatically goes into a registry for the state. Okay, so it automatically goes into, but it's not about tissue. If you choose, if you would like to donate tissue, you have to make those arrangements separately. It's not automatically assumed that you will also be donating tissue.
So are you saying that you're saying that basically you can donate your organs and then you can also donate your tissue
Yes.
so that when the body comes back after donating the organs, it will still go to the funeral home, obviously, and at that point, there's a conversation about body donation for the tissue, where you would talk about the science care company
Correct.
to see if
And-
you qualify for that.
More than likely, those conversations are going to happen in a very short period of time. So if, the family is talking to the funeral home, the person has passed, they are an organ donor, Lifeline of Ohio has harvested, or not harvested, but procured the organs. The family will be working at that time with the funeral home to make arrangements to have it shipped straight over to the science care.
Okay. So these conversations that you're talking about happen with the family and the funeral home. But in the very beginning, you were talking about, I have a note here someplace, that you were talking about the hospice care was having this conversation with the family. If you were in hospice care.
So if a person is on hospice, sure, because when a person passes away and they're on hospice, 9 times out of 10, we're gonna get the phone call from that hospice staff that says, Mrs. Jones has passed away, and, we need to have your team come out and take the loved one into your care. So that would be how the hospice is involved. You have a lot of hospice social workers too that have conversations with the patient and the family prior to their passing, because once somebody is on hospice, they have a terminal diagnosis. Their prognosis for living is small. So they're going to talk to the family about, have you considered funeral arrangements? Have you considered what you want to do? So they will have those conversations with the family, and then all of that can be related to the funeral home in the process at, either immediately before the person passes or at the time of passing. Because sometimes we'll get a phone call from a hospice staff, either, a staff or a nurse or a chaplain that'll say, we're here with Mrs. Jones and she's not expected to make it through the night. So that way we know and we can be prepared. And she'll say, we've had conversations with the family and the family would like to donate the organs through Lifeline, or we'd like to just have a full body donation to Science Care, something along those lines, or the university or something like that. Okay. Okay, so again, when we talk about the difference between tissue and organ, we talk about the fact that the organ procurement is highly regulated. Tissue procurement is not currently, but there are lobbyists working towards making tissue procurement, tissue harvesting much more regulated, because we want to make sure that regardless of what happens with the loved one, that their body is treated with dignity and respect, no matter, which way they decide to go. If they, are just doing regular organ donation, tissue donation, donation to a university, whatever the case is, and so by having more rules and regulations on tissue harvesting, then it can be more respectful, like organ procurement is. You had to have seen those videos, the walk of life in the hospital, where they get all the hospital staff to line the halls, and the family walks with their loved one as they're taking it to the suite to harvest their organs. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So, okay.
So the first decision the family needs to make is whether, well, assuming your goal is not to pay for anything, you're making a decision to have the body cremated at that point rather than having a viewing or anything like that.
Not necessarily, no. The only time a family would choose to not have to pay anything is through full body donation. Okay, that's it. Otherwise, it has to go through the process of identifying whether the deceased person is indigent. Okay, if the person is indigent, then the only thing that's going to happen is cremation by the city, and then the city dictates what happens there, regardless of whether there's family around or not. Okay, so you've got different things going on here. Okay, you've got stuff that's for indigent, then you have stuff that's about like body donation, tissue harvesting, organ donation, stuff like that. That's over here. These are different categories of disposition, if you will. But because full body donation doesn't cost anything, it's included in this because it's an option for families who don't want to pay anything. Okay, does that make sense? as a family member, when your loved one passes away, okay, if you don't want to pay anything, body donation is your choice, okay? Or you just relinquish your rights. That's the other thing. You could absolutely say, I relinquish all of my rights. I don't want anything to do this. Like, for example, okay, Betty was living in a nursing home, on Medicaid. She doesn't really have any money, but she's got a nephew out in California who she has no relationship, hasn't seen, or whatever the case is, but because he's the only living relative and you have to go through decedent care, they contact this nephew and say, your Aunt Betty has passed away. Are you willing to take responsibility for her disposition? And he could say no. And he just relinquishes his responsibility as the only surviving family member. In that case, it falls back to that slide in the beginning where a public officer is assigned to Betty to manage her disposition. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay. So you went from the track of indigent, and now we're on the track of what happens if you aren't indigent, but you want to reduce the cost of what the funeral what the funeral's going to be.
Right.
Okay.
The average person who has signed the back of their driver's license and is an organ donor, okay? Just because they're an organ donor is not going to reduce the cost of whatever services the family chooses to have. That just says that they're donating their organs. That's it, okay? So funeral home will contact Lifeline of Ohio. Lifeline will come out, or the hospital. The hospital will come out, contact Lifeline and the funeral home to let them know what's going on, because as soon as they take those organs, that body is going to pass, right? So the funeral home, Lifeline, and the hospital are all involved, okay? Then once the Lifeline of Ohio is done, the funeral home goes and picks up the body from the hospital and then has their arrangement meeting with the family to figure out what kind of funeral services they want. It does not reduce the cost of funeral services.
And that's when you would talk about tissue donation or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully at some point in time, that conversation has happened beforehand, typically with the social workers and the caregivers that are involved. Okay. So, but you got to figure, let's look at this logistically. If somebody wants to donate their organs and they're 90 years old, Lifeline of Ohio looking for 90-year-old organs.
Michael.
You know what I'm saying? Versus somebody who's 50 years old, those families are having those kinds of conversations. Those families are talking about it and saying, I want my son's death to have meaning. I want to donate his organs so that somebody else can live. That's kind of the logistics of it, if that makes sense, you know? And that goes the same with tissue donation, okay? Somebody who's 90 years old, these for-profit tissue harvesting places may not be looking for 90-year-old patellas or, ligaments or things along that line. So
I used to give blood all the time.
Mhm.
I can no longer give blood because I have cancer. So even before you die, people were refusing your body parts. So.
We did.
Okay.
have-
I know it's often
I was
you.
gonna say,
That's what you.
we did have, Lifeline of Ohio came in for Lunchtime Learning a couple of years ago, to talk about that cancer survivors can be, organ donors. I just don't remember with my poor memory if they talked about tissue or not, but we definitely talked about organ, but they might not want your blood, but they'll take other organs that don't have any cancer connection.
bones, ligaments, things like that, yeah. Okay, we've got a bit to get through, so we'll keep going here. Okay, just some examples of tissues that can be donated. I'm not gonna read through that list. I'll let you read through all the way.
Yes.
Do that on your own.
Right.
Okay. Okay, for-profit donation. National Organ Transplant Act forbids the buying and selling of human organs, including bone marrow. Tissue does not fall under those regulations. So that just falls in line with when we were talking about regulating tissue donation versus, organ donation. Now, the one thing I will point out that if a family decides to donate the body in whole to these for-profit organizations, depending on what the needs are for the tissues at the time, those tissues could be worth up to $80,000 for them. The family doesn't see any of that money. Okay? The family gets a free cremation out of it, if you will. That's it. Okay? All right. Again, this goes back to, calculating the value of human tissue. It's an article, there's the link right there, but it's, talking about, how tissue harvesting what's the impact of tissue harvesting and how do you calculate the value of what's harvested? So, all right. Miscellaneous resources out there. So we talked about indigent, we talked about body donation. Now we'll talk about some of the other resources. Oh, we talked about some foundations like for children and things like that. So civil service organizations. Some civil service organizations have special funds set up where if the person who passed was a very active member in that organization, they may be able to assist. They may be willing to assist with funeral costs. Not always. If you're a member of Lions Club and you never go to any meetings and you never do anything, the likelihood that the Lions Club is going to assist with funeral costs is next to none. Makes sense. Hospice foundations, actually years ago, hospice foundations used to be able to help families with funeral cost assistance. But now hospice foundations are set up for extraordinary circumstances, not funeral services. So if a person living here passes away on hospice, but mom lives in Guatemala, then the foundation can help pay to get mom here to the United States for funeral services. That's kind of what their foundations are set up for now. Extraordinary circumstances, okay? Life insurance policies. So life insurance policies, years ago, everybody said, go get a life insurance policy, get a $10,000 life insurance policy just to cover the cost of your funeral expenses, right? Life insurance policies are wonderful things, but the idea behind a life insurance policy is that when the loved one passes, the money goes to family, okay? Now, if the person who passed away was on Medicaid, Medicaid wants their money. They will tell the family to cash out that life insurance policy and use that money to pay back to Medicaid. You don't get to keep it. Medicaid considers a life insurance policy an asset. And they won't pay for anything until all the assets have been paid down to what, $1,500 or something like that, $2,000 max. And when we talk about assets, we're talking about, again, no bank accounts, no car, no property, things like that, other than a surviving spouse needing things for their survival. They won't take it all away from a spouse. But a life insurance policy is a good option as long as Medicaid is not involved.
I lost my brother unexpectedly in 2020, and he had two different life insurance policies, and both of those cover the cost of his funeral.
Yeah.
That's how my mom wasn't, because she was his beneficiary, so she just put that money right, and that covered. So the whole family was not in the red, taking care of my brother.
Yeah.
And in fact, in 2 weeks from now, at the end of the month, we're going to have State Farm come in for a special lunchtime learning, talking about life insurance policies.
Okay.
So
Good.
The Medicaid Well, in terms of the spouse.
Yeah.
Medicaid, after the spouse dies, will try to come back and get the
Yeah, they
money
want-
that was expended on.
Yeah.
That's been expended. So if you have a house, the house needs to be resolved when the spouse dies, but they don't come and force the spouse to sell the house when the first person dies.
Right.
But when the house does sell, Medicaid will come in and take their money.
They want their money.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the spouse, just because they don't come and try to get money from the spouse in the original instance, doesn't mean that they won't ultimately try to get the money from
Right.
the estate.
They're still out there and they've still got deficit.
That's right. All right, some other options, church communities, crowdfunding. You guys have heard of GoFundMe? Okay, GoFundMe is the online resource where people can set up an account and miscellaneous donors put money into the account for whatever the cause is. The thing about crowdfunding that you have to keep in mind is whoever sets up the account, that's the beneficiary. So, you know, your nephew, Billy, who says, I'm gonna set up this GoFundMe account to pay for Aunt Ruthie's funeral service, and then, you know, $20,000 gets put into that account, and Billy takes off the money and none of it goes towards the funeral service. Okay. There are other resources out there such as, Treasured Memories is a specific funeral funding like GoFundMe, but it's set up so that whatever money is raised goes to the funeral home and not to the person who set up the account. Yeah. So some funeral homes have also looked at putting together payment plans. Now, I will tell you this, if you are pre-arranging your funeral services, you can set up a payment plan for a prepaid funeral. If you are doing it at the time of need, most likely that funeral home is gonna say, we need this money by X date or we're not going to do the service. Okay? Because you think about it, when it comes to someone who is, you know, financially challenged, they're gonna pay their rent, they're gonna pay their heating and water bill, they're gonna pay their car bill, they're gonna pay their cell phone before they pay a funeral. All right, so funeral homes have the right to say, we want this funeral paid in full prior to, otherwise, you know, we can't do it.
Well, and I know you didn't say it, but I'm going to put a plug in. Michael Schettinger has done lunchtime learnings for us in the past, and he has done advanced directives. And one of the things he had shared at that session is that Schettinger does do prepaid payment plans.
Yes.
So that's a service that I know that you guys offer.
Yeah, we have an entire team of advanced funeral planners that will meet with folks in their home. They bring all the resources, help figure out what is going to be best for you based on what you want to happen, what your financial requirements are, and we'll set it all up for you. So yeah. We would love to see an advanced funeral plan be part of advanced directives in the state of Ohio, but it's not.
Yeah.
All right.
So if you have advanced planning, you can go back to, so basically, you can go back and you can say, okay, I want to donate my body for tissues at that point. So you're basically telling the funeral home, this is exactly what I want before the event happens.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You can when you sit down with an advanced funeral plan, okay, and planner, and you say, you know what, on my passing, I want Lifeline to come in and harvest or take my organs, you know, whatever the case is. But I also want to donate my body to science. There's not much the advanced funeral planner is going to be able to do because you're donating, right? And there's really not a lot of costs, okay? Where you have a challenge, like I said, the professors in the university or something like that, you know, Professor Bill so-and-so, donated his body to the university says, he's 102 years old and we have all of these other bodies, we don't need it. Professor Bill's family still has to make funeral arrangements. Yeah. So it's a matter of thinking about things logically, okay? If I'm approaching, like I said, if I'm approaching 90 years old, I'm not even gonna consider body donation or organ donation just because I'm 90 years old and who wants my stuff?
That's right.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, but if I'm 60 years old and, something happens, then yeah, that's a conversation I'm gonna have with my family, or that they're gonna have. Okay, resources. So when it comes down to it, reality is families are very resourceful. Okay, if a family is looking at having to make arrangements for a loved one who's passed and the family is financially challenged, they tend to be very resourceful. And of course, our funeral directors are always going to try and put together something that is not only meaningful and dignified for the family, but also fits within their budget. There is no point trying to make a funeral service that is going to strap the family, that's just going to make them miserable. That doesn't make any sense, and then not only are they dealing with the death of their loved one, now they're dealing with financial issues on top of it. That's just stupid. Okay, so we will work with families in the best of our capacity to help them create something very meaningful. And that's kind of what I want to talk about when it comes to families and stuff like that. Families come together, they're resourceful. There's ways that they can, do what needs to be done when it comes down to it. And I think sometimes a lot of families just say, you know what? I don't think we're going to pay for funeral services because we're all strapped financially. So we'll have mom cremated and then we'll all just go to Buca de Beppo and have our own little thing. That's an option too. I encourage families to do something. I hate to see these families that say, oh, we're not gonna have a funeral. We're not gonna do anything because, whatever, for whatever reason, we don't want to spend the money, or, mom lived through this long drawn out disease process. So we've already had our funerals, whatever the case is, these families that choose to do nothing, I just don't think have a really good opportunity to resolve their grief. Now, if they decide to, go ahead and not spend a lot of money on funeral services at the funeral home, please, by all means, do something, have a dinner, have people over at your house and cook pots of chili. It doesn't matter. Do something. Do something. Okay. Also, as part of the Schettinger family of brands, we have two other divisions. One of them is called Advantage. Advantage is a low-cost funeral option for families. We have the Hilltop location, the Linden location, and our North location, which is on Carl Road, that are all part of the Advantage brand. And we are able to put together very dignified funeral services that use the same behind the scenes Schettinger services, but that are very cost effective for families. Now, what I will tell you about the Advantage brand is they're open 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Okay. If you want something on the weekend, that's going to be an additional cost. But if you are looking to have a very nice funeral that could be thousands of dollars less, then Advantage is your way to go. But you have to utilize those locations. You can't say, I want to pay for Advantage, but I want to have my funeral service at Upper Arlington. That's just not going to work. Okay. That's how we're able to do that. And then Buckeye Cremation is literally just online cremation ordering. We see families where their loved one had a long, drawn out process that they've already said their goodbyes. These are families maybe living with a family member who's had Alzheimer's and gone through, the cognitive decline. They've already encountered so many losses along the way. They just said, I just want to have a cremation, and Buckeye Cremation is that option. There are no services. It is just a cremation, period. Okay. And then the role of a funeral home, I really do like this because it says a lot. A good funeral gets the dead where they need to go. We take care of the body one way or another. And the living where they need to be. We're going to take care of the family and make sure that they are as good as can be on their grief journey through the funeral service or whatever they choose to do. So I know that says Kevin Schettinger, and I don't look like Kevin, and that's okay.
Because you work closely with them.
Right, but that, if you have any questions or concerns, then feel free to ask.
Thank you so much, Julie.
You're
We really
welcome.
appreciate that. Does anybody online have any questions? You're welcome to unmute or use the chat. Okay, well, again, Julie, thank you so very much. We greatly appreciate you coming in and sharing your time and talent and expertise with us.
Thank you for having me.